Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. If I can ask that we settle down as we start our second day's program. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Betha Dlamini. I am the founding president of African Women in Energy and Power, and I will be your Masters of Ceremony for today as well. Honorable Minister Gwede Mantashe in absentia, Deputy Minister Mr. Parkstow, Deputy Minister of Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Director General of Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, Mr. Jacob Mbele, ministers in attendance, members of government, utility CEOs, ambassadors, council generals, local government, municipality and city leaders, respected leaders of industry from Africa and abroad, friends and colleagues, good morning and welcome to the second day of Enlit Africa 2024. We had a fantastic first day of the conference with a riveting conversation with ESCOM leaders that demonstrated the culmination of 18 months of effort dedicated to the Energy Action Plan. It was absolutely wonderful. The CEO, Group CEO of ESCOM, underscored that conversation by saying the momentum of stakeholder collaboration must be deployed to consolidate 30 years' experience of democracy. We had an inspiring speaker from GE Vernova, who also called us to take advantage of the opportunity to energize the continent. One key message was that just energy transition is fundamental for the continent's industrialization, especially the hybridization of energy systems. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to play a video just to show you how excellent yesterday was.
Hi, is that Enlit Africa calling? And that's day one of Enlit Africa 2024 Wrapped with a bang. Our journey ignited with an electrifying opening keynote featuring a dynamic address by our CEO, David Ashdown, and a warm welcome address from the City of Cape Town's very own Kadri Nassib. The energy kept soaring with the keynote address by Mr. Jacob Mbele, the Director General of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, followed by an inspiring sponsor address from Kenneth Oyakire of GE Vernova. The keynote ended off with an insightful fireside chat featuring experts from ESCOM and the Energy Council of South Africa. They explored the exciting new leadership at ESCOM, the Just Energy Transition Partnership, and our ambitious road to 2030. Attendees were then immersed in the authentic Enlit Africa vibe with a spirited African dance performance. Our vibrant solution-focused expo floor buzzed with activity from start to finish, showcasing the latest in technology and innovation. Attendees explored cutting-edge product launches and interactive activations throughout the day. We capped off the day with the launch of the Energy Council South African Committee, followed by engaging networking drinks that kept the conversations flowing. As the sun set on Enlit Africa Day 1, our delegates dressed up and showed up in style for the exclusive and unforgettable Standard Bank networking dinner. We can't wait to kick off Day 2 of Enlit Africa as we continue on our thrilling journey of becoming Enlit.
It was indeed a wonderful start of Enlit 2024. I'm going to go very quickly through the house rules to ensure that you're comfortable in your experience of this event. Restrooms are allocated on each level of the convention center. You will see 2 sets of restrooms on either side of the venue. This is a non-smoking venue, and there is allocated smoking areas at the back of Hall 3, which you can access via the exhibition halls. Fire and emergency exits are clearly marked and in and around the building. Medic is based in Hall 3 at the entrance should anyone require medical assistance. Finding your way. Should you have any queries on allocations of certain conference tracks, you may chat to the ladies at the information desk and you will find multiple directional signs in the foyer area. Whilst we have security in the venue, your personal belongings are absolutely your responsibility, and we encourage that you keep those very close to you. While attending the conferences session, we kindly ask that you keep your mobile phones on silent mode during the session. Should you require to take a call, kindly excuse yourself and take it at the foyer. The Wi-Fi link and password can be found at the back of your badge, as well as a QR code to download the event app to access the very latest event program. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very grateful for today's keynote address, which is sponsored by Siemens Sub-Saharan Africa. We are going to play a video on their public-private partnership and the benefits it has yielded for the sector before I call upon the Siemens speaker.
Okay, we are here in the Eastern Cape in Upper Blinkport, a small little community, as you can see, widespread with around about 70 households, which now gets powered by renewable energy, a whole grid in a small space, and it runs perfectly, actually. So yeah, it makes you proud, I would say.
The project began with an engineering company owned by young Black South Africans who are involved in the engineering and execution of renewable energy projects. So what they wanted from Siemens was a controller that can help them to be able to control all the different energy sources.
We came across many providers of controllers, programmable logic controllers. But when we came across the Siemens, microgrid controller, we were left without any shadow of doubt that this was the intelligent guide that we needed.
Yeah, technology like Siemens plays a very important role. First of all, here, it plays as the brain of this mini grid. The controllers, everything that is here, they are all controlled by the software from Siemens. So they playing the very important role, the technology that is used here.
So one of the main parts was as well from the German government was a full skills transfer, which was as well done with people from the municipality.
I never knew anything about the solar until I was involved in this project and the technology that is used here. So I gained a lot.
One gets quite vivid images of the community that we stepped into 4 years ago. The vivid image that is quite striking in my head right now is that of entering a community that is dead silent with just a lot of smoke.
I came here, there was no electricity here. People were used to making fire here. Even if they cook, or they want to have some tea or coffee, whatever, wash it, hot water, they have to go to the bush, get some wood and make fire. There was no life here before because there was no electricity, there was no work.
And fast forward 4 years later, you enter a community that is nothing like what we saw the first time. You enter a community that has got fresh air because they are no longer using charcoal to cook. They are using electricity to cook.
Many people are asking us, but we're telling them how does it work and how is our lives now. We're staying in a better life now. Everything is fine.
Since we have the electricity that we're using now, our lives has changed a lot. Like, I even do my own business now.
It has been amazing to see the economic activity that has spiraled out of just but the provision of electricity, but also the impact of seeing young people able to access information on their phones and their tablets and laptops because they all of a sudden can charge that phone from home opens up a new world of opportunity.
I feel good because, you know, someone in this community can also grow up and work for a company like Siemens because of the opportunity that they've been given to be able to have a light bulb, to study.
It brings all forms of emotion to the heart, but it also brings a great sense of pride and hunger to do it more. Now more than ever, we need to duplicate what was done there, because that is just what a community, we can do more. The technology is there. Providing electricity to those that didn't have electricity previously spans far beyond just lighting up a light bulb.
I wish the same for other places that doesn't have electricity like this place was.
Let's respond to energy poverty, and nobody can do it alone. We need each other. And Siemens has got the potential to bring these stakeholders together, to train us in achieving this. And we are more than hungry and happy and excited to be those partners. We want to do the work. We're ready with all of our hands combined.
Indeed, addressing energy poverty is the foundation to alleviating poverty. Let's welcome Ms. Sabine Dalom, CEO Siemens Sub-Saharan Africa, transforming grids for sustainability.
Thank you, Bertha. Much appreciated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a great honor today to address you on this very important topic. And as you can see from the short video we have seen, it is something which is fundamentally embedded into what Siemens does. Why do we talk about this today? Why is this important to us? Because we have a situation that, first of all, in Africa, there is still a large energy poverty. And we all know that without energy and water, there's very little economic activity you are able to grow on a continent with more than 1.5 billion people living on. More than 600 million don't have access yet to electricity. But there's also a fundamental change, because African countries, and it's obviously a regional setup, some of them are depending on fossil fuels. The country where we are in here today, South Africa, relies on coal-fired power station in order to generate the needed electricity for our economy. But so in other countries, they have gas, they have diesel, other resources, which are contributing to their GDP in their economies. So we need to find combined solution in order to transform these economies. And one of the pillars to why it needs to be done is, for one, last year at COP28, you will remember there was a decision made, not as hard as maybe the Western countries would like have seen, but particular that fossil fuels will be ramped down over a period of time. What means we will also see that these kind of projects will have a much harder time to get to bankable completion. On the other hand, we also know in 2023 was officially the warmest year on record since we record temperatures of our planet. And that means that we stay within these 1.5 degree warming of our environment is very unlikely, because we are already at this time at 1.3. So we will need to put all the effort in. And that is particularly important for Africa, for the African continent, because the African continent will be hardest hit by the increasing temperature on this planet. So if the global temperature would be 1.5 degree, we can calculate for Africa between 3 and 4 degrees, which will mean there will be a significant negative impact on economic activity, particularly in food security, in agricultural activities. And that's why we have supported a project like Upper Blinkwater, which you have seen here, because it is important to help people to get the resilience to cater for themselves if other events are coming to a negative impact. When we look at the total cost, which is estimated, there's a study from McKinsey from 2022, they estimate 275 trillion US dollar to be needed to have a global carbon neutral transition. This is a massive amount of opportunity, not only on the African continent, but in general, because that means that technology has to be produced, has to be installed, and we all can participate in this great business opportunity. However, when we look at Africa, we are not there yet. Many people, as I said, don't have access to electricity. The continent is not as industrialized as other regions on the globe. But we do see with, for instance, the changing in the energy transition, specifically on mobility, but also in other areas, specifically in the developed world, that resources are needed. Geopolitical tensions focuses on Africa. And we also know that the African continent has a unique opportunity because we haven't industrialized and we haven't put everywhere coal-fired power stations or anything the like. We have a possibility to be the leader in the green transition because that's a great opportunity because of the vast availability of wind, sun, geothermal energy, and hydroelectric. These are technologies, specifically when we look at PV, have shown to be the most cost-effective and the fastest way to get electricity to consumer. And here, specifically in Africa, our example, which we have showcased to you today, highlights that it is possible. And we can make all combined a difference for the energy transition on the African continent. Because supply chain legislation, which demands from companies like industrial global players producing cars here on the continent, food, and any other thing which we are consuming in Africa, but also exporting, if you think about minerals, into the world, demand that we follow ESG principles. And supply chain legislation, legislated recently also in Europe, will make it mandatory to showcase what you have done as a company in order to not burden the climate for all of us. So therefore, if we want to be on the African continent with all the resources available, specifically the ones which don't come with a US dollar price tag, namely the sun, the water, as well as the wind, we have a great opportunity to shape this continent into the green leading continent for the global transition. But what does it take? It's not only that I talk about it and we do a few little public-private partnerships together with the governmental institutions. It also does require funding. For once, funding is by the banks, but also by funding agencies, specifically for projects which help to collect revenue. Because at the end of the day, a story also comes around if people pay for their electricity, for their water. And there we have a great opportunity to use digital technology to make that happen. On the other hand, we also need a framework, regulations, and a collaborative approach between business and government to make a way forward. And we know that this works because, as you will know here in South Africa, Business Unity South Africa, together with the presidency and Business Leadership South Africa, have embarked exactly on this one to help the South African government to get over load shedding and pull all resources together as a combined effort to make a difference. And that is what you have seen over the last 18 months in this country. So that's one part. But on the other hand, when we talk about just energy transition and a transition to a better future, to a greener future, we also need to talk about the resources. And here again, Africa is leading. We have an abundance of young people which are innovative, which are creative, which can help to come up with ideas in Africa, which can be deployed into the globe. And this is one of the parts which we do actively in Siemens through a whole host of initiatives. One is working with Berta on the woman in energy, but also on other activities, particular collaborations with universities, UN Women, and agencies to help gain the access for African young people to technology, educate them, and make them able to solve their own problems here on the continent. I'm excited about the time ahead of us. I believe in Siemens as a pillar of sustainability and commitment to reducing emissions in the global network. Believe that we really have a chance to work together. I'm looking forward to have an intense discussion here with my fellow panelists, and I hope you have a lot of questions. Engage with us and let us make a plan for a better future for all of us and bring Africa into the forefront of a green industrialization. Thank you so much.
Stakeholder collaboration can enable the continent to become the green leader, green economy leader of the global transition. Those are the words from Ms. Sabine. Immediately after her, we have Mr. Matthias Nab, who is the director of UNDP Regional Services Center for Africa, who will address the topic supporting sustainable transition to the green economy. And he will be illustrating the UNDP contribution, looking at access to finance and mobilizing private sector to explore opportunities on the African continent. Let's welcome him with a round of applause. Let's continue clapping until this year. Thank you. No?
Oh, there we go. Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies. Let me stand on existing protocols and acknowledge all our dignitaries here, private sector chiefs, government officials, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. I am delighted to be here at Enlit Africa representing the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP. Recent years have delivered stark warnings on climate change as news of devastating impacts continue to pour in from around the world. Temperature records have been repeatedly broken, and extreme disasters such as unprecedented droughts, punishing destructive floods, and even locust outbreaks have become regular news. However, a better, fairer, and greener future is possible. I would like to take this opportunity to highlight some of the key issues facing Africa in climate finance, climate adaptation, energy and just transition, and the approaches and practical solutions adopted by UNDP to accelerate a green, resilient, and sustainable transition. Second, I will also introduce UNDP's new Africa Green Business and Financing Initiative and its flagship report, which will be launched today, later today, at this Enlit Africa event. Across the region, UNDP supports African countries in promoting transformative climate action to reduce vulnerability and increase resilience. Our support draws upon an extensive portfolio of expertise and interventions in energy, forests, water, agriculture, health, youth, finance, governance, green jobs, and gender equality. We also support access to climate data to better inform policies and strengthen disaster preparedness. However, the climate finance needs of African countries are severely underfunded, as my previous colleague mentioned. At the inaugural Africa Climate Summit, held in Nairobi, Kenya in September 2023, African heads of state and government adopted the African leaders' Nairobi Declaration on Climate Change and Call to Action. While climate finance to the continent has increased, growing about 24% each year between 2011 and 2021, when compared globally, Africa only receives around 2% of total global climate finance. Private sector finance and engagement are critical to meeting the significant gap and achieving climate and nature targets. Developing nations will require 340 billion per year in international adaptation finance by 2030, compared to the 29 billion obtained in 2020. And based on NDCs, it is estimated that African countries need between 1.1 and 2.8 trillion between 2020 and 2030 to implement their national their NDCs. If looking at the higher estimate annually, this means that 277 billion will be needed. On energy, ladies and gentlemen, energy lies at the heart of both the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all, as emphasized in Sustainable Development Goal 7, SDG 7, can bring significant positive changes for millions of people through new economic opportunities and jobs. Progress on SDG 7 can also empower women, children, and young people, improve access to education and healthcare, promote sustainable, equitable, and inclusive communities, and enhance resilience to climate change impacts. In 2021, 675 million people still lacked electricity, and 2.3 billion lacked clean cooking fuels and technologies. The share of renewables in global total final energy consumption only reached 19.1% in 2020. The Africa Mini-Grids Program, a multi-partner private initiative led by UNDP, is working with 21 African countries to enable scaled-up private investment in renewable energy and mini-grids to rapidly and cost-effectively providing electricity and new development opportunities to some of Africa's poorest communities. The ultimate goal is to bring electricity and new development opportunities to some of the continent's poorest communities. For UNDP, just transition is fundamentally about the principle, process, and practice of embedding justice, human rights, and inclusivity into linking nature and climate action. The perception of just transition varies across different countries and regions. What is important, though, is that each country fosters ongoing dialogue to develop a common vision for what a just transition means. We are seeing a growing recognition of the need for a just transition in the context of the Paris implementation. UNDP actively supports South Africa's journey towards a sustainable carbon neutral economy with a strong emphasis on fairness and inclusivity for all stakeholders, including workers, communities, and businesses. This endeavor aims to improve the country's societal well-being and human development significantly. This ambitious goal necessitates substantial and sustained commitment from government, businesses, academia, and civil society, as well as a willingness to face the complex trade-offs and challenges of any major societal transformation. A key focus of UNDP cooperation since the enactment of the Paris Agreement has been to help scale up the implementation of NDCs, which have become the main instrument for guiding policy responses to climate change. Of the 195 countries that have submitted updated nationally determined contributions as of 2020, as of 20th October 2023, 74 countries, representing 38%, reference just transition. As countries continue to develop and implement their NDCs, there is a unique opportunity to embed the principle and process of just transition. Integrating just transition in the NDC and LTS design and implementation can increase social cohesion and the acceptability of climate measures. UNDP's Climate Promise, the world's largest offer of support to countries on NDCs, has supported 45 African countries, out of which 42 have submitted their new or updated NDCs to the UNFCCC as of May 2023. The Climate Promise Initiative demonstrated an impact on enhancing mitigation ambition and strengthening the adaptation components of the revised NDCs, particularly in linking with national adaptation plans, the SDGs, and green recovery, long-term climate change strategies, and net zero targets. Under the cross-cutting theme of women and youth empowerment, efforts to mainstream gender have helped countries strengthen the institutional capacity and systems to plan and implement gender-responsive climate action. Climate Promise supported countries have also recognized the role of youth in their renewed climate pledges, and with support from UNDP, have been involving young people in climate action. Ladies and gentlemen, with all the progress that the region's vast natural resources and unique demographics of a youthful and growing labor force, Africa is well positioned to be a global leader in innovation towards building the green economy through environmental sustainability, climate action, and biodiversity conservation. Therefore, UNDP is pursuing the Africa Green Business and Financing Initiative to identify ways and means to support private sector engagement in green business and finance that can drive a sustainable and impactful change in the sector. A flagship report on green businesses and financing will be launched later today as part of the Enlit Africa program. The report offers an overview of the current state of green business and finance across Africa, referencing the wide range of activities, projects, and private companies driving innovation and growth in this space to stimulate on-the-ground actions in green business and finance that promote real and meaningful change. For UNDP, we are committed to co-creating the tools and knowledge alongside governments and the private sector to develop a robust investment pipeline that prioritizes green initiatives. We also emphasize equal benefits for all, ensuring no one is left behind in pursuing sustainable development and climate resilience. On behalf of UNDP, I take this opportunity to extend an invitation to all of you to engage with us on the report findings and contribute to a green and sustainable future. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, sir. It is very encouraging to listen to a report that says just energy transition is embedded in the strategies that are being executed to pursue nationally determined contributions by multiple countries, and that there is finance available or being made available or being facilitated to support the country's trajectory towards achieving the nationally determined contributions targets. Thank you, sir, for your kind insights. The next speaker is Ms. Kay Wells. She's the Managing Director of Nova Economics. Her and I have engaged in very interesting conversations around the conundrum that the continent finds itself debating, the need for baseload energy for industrialization and the need for decarbonization, and how we exploit the endowment of renewable energy sources and prioritize universal access to electricity. All these challenges converging into one big challenge that we are trying to decode. I would like to welcome Ms. Kay to share with us the factors determining success in transitioning to a low carbon future.
Morning, everyone, and thank you so much to Enlit Africa and to Siemens for having me here today. My job is, I'm an economist, so I can't speak without my PowerPoint. My job here today is basically to set the scene for what promises to be a really robust panel discussion around the topic of how difficult it will be for countries to transition to clean energy and the sort of heterogeneity across countries. And what we did was develop a very simple framework for trying to assess what will pave the way for a smoother transition in some countries and what might make it relatively difficult for others to make the transition. So as you would all be well aware, the aim of the Paris Agreement that in 2015 is to make sure that global temperatures do not rise by more than 1.5 degrees over the course of the next century. And to do this, we essentially have to reduce annual global carbon emissions by 37 gigatons per year, which is what it currently is, to by 35% to 24 gigatons in 2030, and then to zero eventually by 2050, which means we will not be putting more carbon into the atmosphere than we are extracting. And there's absolutely no doubt that this is a really ambitious goal, and it's not going to be something that is easy to achieve. There are several possible pathways to net zero. And really, it depends on the choice of technologies, and this differs from one organization to the next because no one has perfect foresight, and there's a lot of uncertainty about which technologies will emerge in the future as the most cost-effective. But nevertheless, if we have a look at the International Renewable Energy Agency's 1.5 degree pathway, we can see the magnitude of the transformation that needs to take place over the next 30 years. So for example, their first lever, we need massively accelerated investment in renewable power generation. We're looking at adding around 1,000 gigawatts of renewable generation capacity globally, as compared to around 220 gigawatts in 2022. We're also looking at a major shift in end uses of energy, away from fossil fuels and towards electricity. And so what that effectively means is that we need to be able to generate 3 times the amount of electricity globally that we currently do. In terms of energy efficiency, to meet our targets, we're going to need, as a globe, to reduce consumption at the same time. So IRENA's plan outlines a 6% global reduction in energy consumption. And then finally, we're looking to some of the emerging technologies like carbon capture and storage and the production of hydrogen and green hydrogen and derivative fuels to help us to shift away from fossil fuels post-2030. It's clear, I always love this figure, but it's clear that the transition requires both a reduction in consumption, which is why the square shrinks, and also a complete shift away from oil and coal towards electricity and final consumption. And with that comes a massive need for investment, not only in generation infrastructure, but also in the transmission and distribution infrastructure that takes that power from where it's generated to where consumers are using it. As I say, there are many different pathways, so it was also interesting to look at what the EIA has put out in their recent 2023 update. Very similar to IRENA, they expect the transition to hinge on a massive acceleration in investment in generation capacity, renewable generation capacity, particularly solar PV and wind. But they're also talking about the need for deployment of other low carbon or low emissions resources post 2030, and are talking about fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage, and also potentially some nuclear, small scale and large scale in the mix. Another difference was they put clearly in the report, they demonstrate the extent to which unabated fossil fuel use must decline over the next 50 years. So they are banking on a 95% reduction in unabated fossil fuel use. What's clear to me, and I suppose to many others, is that this is not going to be easy to achieve. If we look at the world, those countries in the world who are known for being leaders in the deployment of green or renewable energy, like Denmark and Germany, you'll see that although a significant proportion of their electricity is generated from renewable sources, they're still heavily reliant on fossil fuels in their total energy supply. And that would be because of the use, particularly of fossil fuels in the transport sector. In sub-Saharan Africa, you've already heard from previous speakers, we face an even more significant challenge because throughout the continent, we're still facing extreme levels of energy poverty or lack of access to electricity. In the IEA's recent update, they noted that they're not forecasting universal access to energy in sub-Saharan Africa by 2030, which was the SDG 7 goal. They expect that there'll still be 660 million people in sub-Saharan Africa within the next 5 years who will not have basic access to electricity. And part of the reason for this is that although progress is being made, the population is growing faster than access is growing. And as we heard Bertha mentioned earlier, while Africa, wants to take advantage of the significant renewable resources it has, a lot of countries are still highly dependent on exports of fossil fuels for a large chunk of GDP or government revenue, and some are banking on being able to exploit these resources in order to industrialize and to improve access. So there are some difficult trade-offs to make. So with that context in mind, I was asked by one of my clients to please come up with a framework, a simple framework, to assess which countries are relatively well positioned to make the transition to cleaner energy and which countries are going to find this more difficult. So in order to do this, we considered three sorts of groups of factors that we believe are key determinants of whether the transition is likely to be more difficult, relatively more difficult, or easy for some countries and others. And these are, the first basket is what your current energy access picture looks like and your current supply mix. Obviously, for countries where the population already has 100% of the population already has access to electricity, we've seen in the previous slides how important electrification is forecast to be in the transition. So if a country already has 100% access, it's likely to be a lot easier for that country to make the transition to cleaner energy. We've also seen that that's also true for countries where electricity accounts for a high proportion of total final consumption, and in countries that currently have quite a low dependence on coal and oil. It will be much more difficult for those like South Africa who are highly dependent on coal and oil in the energy mix to make the switch, or at least more costly. In terms of pricing and the regulatory environment, this is also highly relevant to sub-Saharan Africa, where a lot of countries have electricity prices that do not reflect the cost of supply, and certainly do not include or internalize the costs of carbon. The closer a country's tariffs are to their cost reflective level, the cost of actually producing electricity, and the greater the extent that they've started to price in carbon, the easier it is to make the switch from traditional fossil fuels to modern, cleaner sources of energy. Also helpful is an enabling policy and regulatory framework. And then finally, your resource endowment is also critical. And this, unfortunately, is a lottery. Fortunately, for most countries in sub-Saharan Africa, they have really good access to solar resources. And North and Southern Africa, as we'll see later, have good access to wind resources. But one also needs in that mix dispatchable low emissions resources that can complement the intermittency of PV and wind in the mix. So those might include gas, battery storage, nuclear, hydro, etc. And then finally, you also need a grid, as I mentioned earlier, to take the power from where it's being generated to where people need to consume it. So the better quality your grid infrastructure is and the more extensive at the moment, the more likely you are to be able to make an easy transition. And then the last, which I don't really deal with in the coming slides, but the extent to which you can potentially import power from neighboring countries. So if you don't have the resources in South Africa, for example, can you import hydro from your neighbors, those gas, those dispatchable resources that you lack? I'm not going to go through every single example, but I did want to share with you some ideas of how this picture looks. So for starters, in sub-Saharan Africa, we have, as I said, the massive additional challenge that we are virtually the only continent in the world where the populations don't currently have a high access to electricity. In some countries, like in Sudan and in Malawi, less than 15% of the population currently has access to basic electricity services like lighting, phone charging, etc. And that is obviously a massive challenge to address alongside or in parallel to trying to green the energy mix. Another unfortunate thing for South Africa is that we come top of the ranking as far as global dependence on coal is in our total energy supply. And this is because we not only use it to produce electricity, but also some of our petroleum products. So this is why the transition in South Africa is going to take a lot of work. And similarly, for some countries like Luxembourg are very highly dependent on oil. And if you take those two together, there are some countries where more than 90% of their current total energy supply would come from a combination of coal and oil, where fortunately for some others, it's less than 10%. This is my pet subject. But a really important thing in sub-Saharan Africa is the extent to which electricity prices are sending the right price signals to the market. So as I say, if you as a government are implicitly subsidizing energy prices or even explicitly subsidizing electricity or coal or petroleum, you're in a much more difficult position when it comes to trying to attract investment in order to build renewable energy and to get people to make the switch. It's very hard to determine what a cost-reflective tariff is. So this is just a very crude measure. It's saying the average electricity tariff across the countries in the sample was around 110 cents per kilowatt hour, US cents. Yes, US cents. And you can see all the countries to sort of the left of Botswana are countries where there's likely to be some sort of subsidy in the price, whether it's implicit or explicit. It may also be that they're very well endowed with a cheap source of electricity like hydro, but by and large, as a sort of indication, the countries to the left are where consumers are currently enjoying some kind of subsidy, and the countries to the right are either countries that have very expensive power, like in the case of Sierra Leone and Liberia, because they're using emergency power, or it's because, like Denmark, they've actually accurately priced carbon into the cost of supply. And that obviously really strengthens the business case if you're trying to deploy renewable energy, if the prices are right. Another really important one, and something Africa can be very grateful for, is the extent to which, solar PV, as you saw in those pathways from the EIA and IRENA, is expected to play a major role in the transition, particularly in the next 5 years, because it's a proven technology and the cost has plummeted year on year. So if you're endowed with good solar resources, you're definitely in a relatively better position to make the transition, and particularly within the next 5 years. But one does have to consider the differences between total technical potential and then the practical potential. So these are different lenses, and one has to exclude areas that are protected in terms of biodiversity, etc., in Africa and everywhere else. What's really interesting is that the orange bars are countries in Africa that feature in the top 20. So you can see that Africa is very well endowed, African countries are very well endowed with solar resources, which puts us in a very advantageous position. I'm not unfortunately going to be able to take you through all the different lenses because I've run out of time. So I'll just come to the sort of overview. But yeah, when you consider all of these factors together, then you start to get a sense of who is going to be able to make the transition relatively easily and which countries are going to find it potentially a bit more challenging. So having a look at some global examples, we see that countries like Australia and Chile are really well endowed with renewable resources, both variable and dispatchable. They have very high electrification rates and energy access. And we think that those countries are in a good position. They're likely to find it relatively easy. They also, importantly, have things that are really up to national governments, cost-reflective tariffs and good energy policy. On the African continent, you can also see similar heterogeneity. You have some countries like Kenya, Ghana, Tunisia, and Egypt in a really good position. And they've generally had very low reliance on coal and oil in the past. And they're also endowed with really good quantities of renewable energy resources. Some countries like Kenya also have strong policy frameworks to promote the uptake in place. On the other end of the spectrum, we have mainly the countries that have very low rates of energy access, like Sudan, where only 8% of the population currently has access. And in addition, South Sudan, I should say, has a very high reliance on coal and oil. And then we have in the middle, what I call the messy middle, countries like South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia, who have amazing endowments of renewable energy, but also have historically been a lot more reliant on coal and oil than the likes of Kenya and Ghana. Thanks. I hope that was interesting and will set the stage for what promises to be a really interesting and robust discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kay. I always knew that this presentation would be difficult with the time constraints that we have, but absolutely profound insights that she has shared on how countries are prepared for transitioning, or the factors that determine how quickly they can transition to a clean energy state. The panel discussion is going to reflect on the presentation delivered by Ms. Welsh. And we are going to discuss the factors determining a success in decarbonization. We're going to look at it from an OEM perspective, again shared by our keynote sponsor, Ms. Sabine Dalom, whom I'll invite to join me on stage. We're going to look at an African utility perspective that will be delivered by Mr. Abel Taylor, the Secretary General of APUA, and I invite him to join me upstage as well. We'll have a perspective from a government Department of Public Sector perspective delivered by Mr. Brian Mainza Sikala, Principal Energy Officer, Renewable Energy, Ministry of Energy in Zambia. And we will have also Mr. Tyler Hacking, Principal Commercial Officer from the US Consulate, to discuss this topic. As they settle on stage, I'm going to share with you how we are going to run the discussion. We still have a phenomenal delivery by Deputy Minister Pakstau coming up. We have a series of sessions that we don't want you to miss at the main Explore 4, which will be listening to 17 projects from all over the continent, from generation, alternative fuels, waste and water management, and key infrastructure projects. So because of that time constraints, I'm going to allow my panelists to deliver a perspective, a reflective perspective on the topic. And that will be guided by a series of questions. I'm going to share with them 2 questions each, and they will have an opportunity to deliver their perspective. Thank you. And I hope it will still be interesting, even though we have limited time. So I'm going to join them for this discussion. Can I squeeze in between?
You may.
Thank you. So as Ms. Kay was presenting, a few things were percolating in my mind that I thought I should highlight to open this discussion. Countries that are well positioned to make a transition, cost-reflective tariffs and affordability, hybridization of energy sources to address intermittency, and investment in grid infrastructure. Ms. Sabine, I'm going to start with you. What specific strategies and technologies are emerging economies adopting to modernize their utility systems for better integration of intermittent renewable energy sources? And how are they addressing the challenges of maintaining grid reliability and stability?
Well, thank you. That's quite a complex one. So I would need about an hour. No, I'm just joking. Look, I mean, when where we saw the contribution from Ms. Kay, so one of the challenges you have currently that for first, when we look at the African continent, there was very little investment into the grid over the past, because if you think about previous engagements over the last, say, decade or so, it was all about access to energy, and I'm pleased to hear that we have come to the realization that it's impossible to give access to everybody by 2030 because population growth and the ability to roll out the grid is challenging. Well, when we look, and you have seen this in the slide, so when we look at the African dynamics, so we not only have the need to stabilize the grid, but we also have different resources coming in, because traditionally the grid was depending on a few large power plants, be it gas or diesel or hydro, depending on which country you are. And they would, have the 50 hertz consistently transmitted into the grid. Now we go for renewables, and specifically, I mean, there was the example of Germany, thank you very much, which is my home country originally. We have now 50% renewables in Germany, but in Germany it's a different story, because we have France and we have Czech Republic around us, which have large nuclear power plants. And if there is an issue with wind and sun, we can cross-feed from our neighbors. In Africa, we don't have this to the extent, and therefore particular technologies to strengthen the power pools, like the Southern African power pool, the Western African power pool, is essential, so that when one doesn't have, the other one can give. So that's definitely one thing which we see has to emerge and is emerging. The second part which we see is that also new technologies come on. And I mean, you had this in one of your little brackets, e-vehicles, which we haven't spoken about because we think it's not relevant for Africa, but we will be wrong, because currently the African mobile transport market, specifically when we talk about cars, is, with the exception of Morocco, Egypt, and South Africa, largely dominated by imports from other regions. And guess what? Once they start not having internal combustion engines anymore, maybe not in the next 2 years, but think about 5 years to 10 years, you are not going to get these cars from the markets. So the Chinese market is transforming into e-vehicles, and so all the other markets. So you will see that getting transport opportunities will desire that these kind of assets are also coming onto the grid, means that in addition to the current scenario we have on the energy consumption, you have population growth and you have new technologies in. The third part, which we haven't discussed, is the emergence of data centers, because data centers are one thing. They are hungry in water and hungry in electricity. And every time we switch on the camera, we make sure we use lots of that, water and electricity, in order to transmit that data over. And this is a key enabler for the African continent, because if we can't digitalize the continent, we're lacking behind everybody else in the world. And so the African continent needs to be on that path. And when we look at emerging technologies, as I say, we spoke about already the strengthening the interconnectivity between the grids, so that one event doesn't lead to catastrophic or negative impacts on the power supply. The other part is, for once, people also need to pay for electricity, and I mentioned that in my keynote speech. Because at the end of the day, when we look in most of the countries, electricity is provided by state-owned entities. State-owned entities have one shareholder, that's the state, which gives it away. And so every time they don't have enough funding on the equity, the state has to bring up more cash from tax revenue, which is diverted from other infrastructure aspects, be it, transport or social grants in that context, in order to keep these companies afloat. And so having a proper management on revenue collection is absolutely vital in order to afford the energy transition and to make sure that we can have exactly that mix. And lastly, we obviously do need to invest into what we call the grid edge technology, where really these bi-dimensional settings have to be considered, which we also don't do, because at this point in time, you can buy electricity, but you can't sell as an individual electricity. And I do believe it's absolutely vital, because that was the key specifically in Germany, which also helped to get the buy-in of the population, because they could gain money from excess of electricity, which they would sell then to the municipality or to the utility, wherever it would be. And considering these aspects on how you are going to ensure that you balance out the intermittence of these renewables combined with maybe some of the base load, but ideally you would have electricity in the context of battery storage, because that will be, for the carbon footprint, the better solution. However, it is more expensive. And as I say, pricing and manage to get the cash into your box, to invest it into the technology, that will be crucial.
Thank you so much for that submission. As you were speaking, it's almost like you're mapping an octopus of the different streams and the different factors that need to be considered as we pursue, or as we contemplate a tailored just energy transition for the continent. Mr. Abel Teller, just following on the insights that Ms. Sabine has shared, I would like you to share what key challenges and strategies are being executed to harmonize the diverse electricity markets across the 55 African Union member states to create a unified, cost-efficient and sustainable energy market under the African Single Market Initiative.
Thank you, Beta. I would like to thank again VUCA Group for partnering with APWA for this event that we appreciate. In fact, I commend all the key speaker, but I like the key presentation, because he gave a real overview of what is happening, because Africa as a continent is very diverse. We have countries with universal access, and for them, it's very easy to now green that generation and be ready for the transition. But many countries struggling to improve the access to electricity. So the all principle behind the single electricity market is how to pull this together, the system, to have the best and energy as clean as possible at the best price at the moment that we need to consume. So behind this, we should start by what is put in place as power pool to organize the regional market, to develop the network regionally. But how do you combine all this? How do you integrate the system to have an African system and a renewable system where we will not be having excess somewhere and load shedding other place? So if we don't have this connection between countries, between systems, so we'll be having not the same path of development. What we need is an integrated system where we'll be sure that we have the best consumption in terms of clean energy where we need it. At the moment, we need it. Unfortunately, we have different even time zone and climate in Africa. So a certain time when we don't need energy, other people have this need. So we cannot see the AFSEM separate from the Continental Master Plan. The Continental Master Plan is the bottom-up exercise to take the program of the power pool to integrate in the continental development so that we be sure that what each power pool is doing can be put together to have a continental plan. And those two initiatives is to back the PIDA program, the program of infrastructure development in Africa, already adopted by the head of state in 2012. So this now in the second priority program of PIDA, all the generation are mainly from clean sources. So we always emphasize that Africa have enough clean energy to develop up the continent and send beyond the continent, while we having also fossil fuel. But what behind the fossil fuel is that for the coming 20 years, we'll be needing to develop some gas, some nuclear to have base load, because behind the clean development, the intermittent renewable energy is very tricky. If we don't pay attention, we'll develop many intermittent and we'll fall into crisis. So the combination between the clean energy development based on hydro, solar, wind, and base load will save the system to reach the two targets. First, increase the access to energy and the power the industry. Because without industry, we will not make the economic growth that we are expecting for Africa. So if we want to power the industry, we need the power at any time that we desire. All the solutions are welcome because for the last miles, we may be using isolated system. APOA is working also to develop off-grid system. Off-grid system, what is needed just to have access for community, like we show for this brilliant PPP experience that we showed. So all this combined will make the system we desire for Africa. So the power utility are in the midst of all those activities where we are developing the grid combination with the private sector in off-grid system and other solutions that they provide. But the regulatory framework is always also developing to incorporate all those to make a system. So to finish, no development of power utility can be made separate from the country plan to develop. The country should have a least cost planning before facing the just energy transition. And this on the field, now you find the utility executing part of its duty from this plan.
Thank you so much, sir. I want to invite Mr. Brian. Mr. Abel shared just now the necessity to integrate AFSIM and the Continental Master Plan to ensure that there are multiple pathways to achieve accelerated energy access, the development of infrastructure, and securing baseload for industrialization of the continent, which will enable economic activity. With economic activity, people can afford electricity. And when people can afford electricity, we can soon move to cost-reflective tariffs, which then also provides the necessary revenue to strengthen the grid that will enable the transition. From your perspective, how can private-public partnerships be leveraged to finance and scale up the deployment of clean energy technologies in emerging economies, such as the one illustrated by Ms. Kay's presentation, Ms. Sabine, and Mr. Abel? And in your view, what best practices can be deployed to mitigate the risk and ensure long-term sustainability?
Thank you very much, Betha, for that question. I think private partnership and public partnership are very important in deployment of renewable energy because governments cannot do them by themselves. So there is need to incorporate the private sector in trying to bring up modern technologies and also the best practices that are there for decarbonization and also to bring in renewable energy. So the infrastructure that is required, to deal with that, sometimes the governments will find that they are lagging behind, but the private sector is always up to date in terms of what is required. What the government should do to leverage private participation is to put in incentives for the private sector to participate. I can give an example. One project that we have in Zambia that has been a bit difficult, to make progress is Get Fit project. So we have a global transfer of renewable energy project that has been difficult because of risk mitigation issues. Yeah, so the government has not been able to provide a proper risk mitigation to the private sector to participate in the project. So it's been very difficult for them to take the risk of investing so much money in participation of those projects without government getting a sovereign guarantee, for instance. So the sovereign guarantee was removed because at some point it was seen that projects are not succeeding, and government is always coming in to provide financing, to mitigate this. So government thought, I think sovereign guarantees have not worked. So maybe we can withdraw this a bit and then, see how the government is going to participate. But that has been a source of challenge. So for public-private partnerships to work, there's need for governments to bring in substantial financing as a risk mitigation, or else projects find themselves in a difficult situation. Some of the projects that have worked funded by World Bank have had to provide a risk mitigation for them to succeed. But really, I think the main issue that brings in success for PPP projects is government engagement in providing security for the investment that the private sector is coming in. So in terms of infrastructure developments that are required for these things to succeed, I think apart from incentives and so on, I think there's need for the commerce side of government, to bring in beyond just incentives such as security, but also to bring in innovations that will make it possible for the private sector to participate, knowing that they have full government support. Yeah.
Thank you so much. In several conversations locally and in other markets, when we consider how we deliver the message, the just energy transition message, and the impact it has on communities and youth who are embedded in legacy value chains, one of the areas that was highlighted, just to support the point that you just said, was creating a conducive environment for youth, the unemployed, and communities to innovate solutions that are within the just energy transition parameters. Mr. Tyler, I'm going to come to you. You're part of the US Department of Commerce. What is your agency doing to support the private sector's efforts here in sub-Saharan Africa?
Great question, Bertha, and thank you to the fellow panelists, and it's an honor to be a part of the panel this morning. I think it's fortuitous that I'm sitting next to Brian here. Actually, the U.S. and Zambia signed a commercial MOU a little over a year ago to partner on various opportunities, including in the energy sector and other opportunities, and from the U.S. Department of Commerce side to commit to help engage the private sector into those conversations and into the opportunities there. And I think if there's a key message to that that I would share, it's engaging the private sector. I think it was a great start to this panel, having the video from Siemens and to see the power of the PPP and the private sector working together with government. So the U.S. Department of Commerce, we are the lead trade promotion arm of the U.S. government in working with the U.S. private sector and helping them to engage with local partners, with local governments on opportunities here in sub-Saharan Africa. And I would say, I mean, I think we all know why that is important, but just to highlight a few reasons why I think engaging with the private sector, both local and international private sector, is so critical. And we've mentioned on technical reasons. I think world-class leading technology and the ability to transfer and to work with local partners. The U.S. has, as in other areas, world-class leading technology in the renewable energy space. And the ability to engage with that international private sector partnership, including the U.S., and engage with local partners helps in that process of getting the technologies that need to be here to leapfrog and to be adapted to the local needs of sub-Saharan Africa. I would also mention capacity building and training. I mean, I look at what we're able to do from the government side and how much that is amplified by the work of the private sector in capacity building and training through direct project work, but also through initiatives themselves. I would look here in Cape Town itself and in a related sector, but on the ICT space, we have AWS, Amazon Web Services, that created their first ever skills center across the street here to train and capacity build individuals to be able to work on technology, including the cloud. Cisco Energy is working with partners on the ground to train and capacity build them up to the set of networking capabilities that are needed to work with Cisco. And so working with the private sector on the capacity building and training is so much amplified in terms of amplifying the government's work. And just overall, from creating economic opportunities. Yesterday, I had the chance to take a tour through GE Vernova's website or pavilion out there. And similar to the story of Siemens, many years in working in sub-Saharan Africa. Over those years, thousands of people employed, and the economic, I think, growth that comes as we partner early, as governments partner early with the private sector with a long-term view, I think is immeasurable and hard to quantify. Just to close, we at the U.S. Department of Commerce receive calls every day from local companies, from local governments, asking how to be connected to potential U.S. partners. And we have various ways that we do that. And hence, I think one of the ways that as we reach out to local governments is stay in connection with us. As we can make those connections, we can make them happen. We have started, for example, a what we call business summits that we have now done 3 of them, and each of them have had an energy component. We did a U.S.-Namibia business summit in 2022 with an energy component focusing on support of opportunities in the energy sector there in Namibia. We were in Zambia in 2022 as well, and we're going to Mauritius later this year on a business summit, bringing private sector together with the governments to discuss these opportunities, again with the idea of early engagement with the private sector and how critical and how important that is. So I think at a high level, that gives a flavor of what we do and in trying to support the private sector and engaging with governments on this energy transition.
Sure. Thank you for that submission. In consideration of the octopus that you painted earlier, highlighting the multiple factors that need to be considered. Indeed, access to finance, access to technology, access to market, access to skills development, which is what you have highlighted, is most critical to empower the ecosystem to progress in its efforts for decarbonization. Leading to our ministerial address, which is going to come shortly, I would like to give each one of you an opportunity to just share what policy frameworks need to be reformed on the continent to accelerate the integration of renewable energy sources that would boost capacity to strengthen the grid infrastructure, to enable excuse me, acceleration of electrification, and to set up the requisite innovation platforms. And of course, looking at the support that is required. I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Beta. I just wanted to just complement what Tella said on capacity building. That is crucial for what we are achieving. And APOA have his initiative of the African Network or Center of Excellence in Electricity that we launched in 2016. And in 6 years, we could train 9,000 people in power utility, 41 in country in Africa. And we put that emphasis that 30% of the training should be in renewable energy promotion and new technology. 25% should be addressed to women in energy, because we are not in a gender balanced industry. So we have a specific program for gender equality in the business. And more important, that regulatory framework. How do we prepare the human capital to this new shift, to new landscape of energy? So if you don't prepare your human capital, no reform can be executed through. So for this preparation within ANSI, is just to combine with what we did in the 70s with the creation of the High School of Engineers, where we train many high-level leaders with some other in the room here, minister and head of power pool and so on. So the regulatory framework and human capital preparation will lead us to better understand the new landscape of energy, because the traditional business that the utility have been having for the past 60 years now have been transformed. So we are now customer-centric and new technology. New technology, we are confident that the GSM revolution that Africa passed through brilliantly will help us to have a digital system where we can incorporate better understand the transition and combine with the NDC. So all this puts us in urgent need to change the regulatory framework to adapt this new situation in Africa. So you may notice now that every year with the African Development Bank, we have the regulatory study to see the level of regulatory framework in each country. And when you see the leading country on regulatory, there where the sector have a better physiognomy. So without regulation, we cannot change the system.
Thank you so much for that submission, Ms. Sabine.
Yeah, look, I mean, one part, and we saw that in the slides, is first of all, you need to have a cost-reflective tariff, yeah, because if you want to get renewable assets onto the grid, and you really want to make a change, you can't compete against free diesel, yeah, and we see countries like, for instance, Nigeria. President Tinubu just recently abolished the subsidization of fuel subsidies. So you will see a gradually change, because all of a sudden now renewable energies are becoming competitive to maybe a diesel generator. So that's one part. The second aspect is, and I'm looking a little bit to Park Stau, who is coming up just now. It's really the way on how utilities work with the municipalities, because the funding of municipalities obviously needs to be refined, because currently when we look in the South African context, the funding of the municipality is a top up on water and electricity. They basically top on the price they buy from Eskom, for instance, and that what makes it to pay their salary and other expenditures. But I do think here we need to find a mechanism specifically in regions where there is not so much economic activity, where there are big payers for water and electricity, together maybe with Treasury on how to fund these communities, because there is a huge dilemma. If you are in a community or in a municipality which doesn't have a huge industrial base, meaning big payers which pay you every month on time the money, then how do you ever want to get a commercial proposition going for a bank to say, I'm going to fund this project? And it can't be always service guarantee. I understand that, but you need to at least get the basic economic principles in place, because otherwise, if you can't pay back your debt, you have a stranded asset. And I think here we need to work together, find a solution which tips it then over. And the third very important part is we need to work, and this is valid for all the countries. If you have renewable resources as a community, as a private person, as an industrial company, how can I feed it into the grid? What is a defined tariff? Because remember, every time I can make a proposition how much money I'm going to earn with it, and I can make the choice if I rather don't use electricity and sell it because it is a better income, I create a commercial proposition again, and that makes my project viable, that makes my investment viable. And in the moment we look too much on the topic of avoiding load shedding or avoiding not having power at all, but we do need to get to the point that we are taking it as a commercial proposition, as a real business case, and then you will see much more take up. And I think South Africa is a good example, because the IPP program is exactly that one, just on a much larger scale.
Thank you so much. Mr. Bryan.
Thank you. I think policies are very critical because they define everything else that happens beyond that. So if a policy framework in a country on renewable energy is very well defined, I think it becomes very easy for certain things to happen. I can give an example of our case in Zambia. We have the Renewable Energy Strategy and Action Plan. So all players in the energy sector, they actually know what is expected, the targets that are there, and the sources of financing that they're expected to access. So government in that way, and all the other agencies of government, could be the utility, the regulator, they know what plans have been set out to achieve. And this is combined also with the targets that we have for climate change mitigation, and so on. So coming from policymaker as a government, the policy, it really defines everything else that goes beyond. It also helps to protect the private sector investments, and the cost-reflective tariff that you talked about is very important, because I think that is a major reason why certain renewable energy projects have been unable to progress. Other policies that are important to make sure that renewable energy progresses are tax incentives. So I think for my country, we've been able to forego certain taxes so that we can make sure that some of these renewable energies are accessed by the poor communities, because I think in the off-grid sector, the target groups are usually the low-income groups, and without tax incentives, you can't really expect to increase uptake of renewable energy. But all that is built into a policy that government has, to see that you progress in renewable energy and low carbon, technologies. So I think the issue of policy cannot be really emphasized. The importance cannot be really emphasized, as it is very important, to progress renewable energy.
Thank you so much. Mr. Taylor, tell me, your capacity building initiatives, excuse me, does it include the review of policy frameworks?
Yeah, no, it does, and specifically within Department of Commerce, we have the Commerce Law Development Program, CLDP, which is here at the conference this week, and it's been on panels as well. They specifically offer capacity building workshops and training to help develop transparent, efficient, effective legal frameworks, and as we look to partner on the energy transition here in South Africa, or in Africa. So
fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it from our panel. There is a lot that's taking place almost concurrently to modernize the system, to address energy poverty, and at the same time integrate new technologies into the grid. Please join me as I thank my panel for these great conversations and allow them to lead. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Our next speaker is, of course, Deputy Minister, Mr. Parks Tau, who is going to deliver the ministerial address. If I can ask delegates to please settle down to allow Mr. Tau to deliver his ministerial address. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much to our program director, and good morning. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to stand on existing protocol, and maybe starting with a point that's been raised earlier. One of the immediate priorities in the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs is to undertake a comprehensive review of the architecture of our local government system. This through the revision of the white paper on local government, but also will soon be publishing a general laws amendment bill or local government general laws amendment bill to enable us to review our local government system and structures and ensure that we're able to learn from the lessons over the past 30 years, or if you like, 25 years in the context of the local government white paper. And in this regard, ensure that we secure the ability of our municipalities to perform against their executive obligations. Now, this might sound like gobbledygook, but our reality is that our local government system enjoins, or rather our constitution enjoins our local governments to generate own revenue and to be able to sustain themselves largely through own revenue. This through rates, the sale of electricity, water, and of course other tariffs that are charged by municipalities. And based on the earlier discussion, issues of tariffs set by municipalities, of course, in many instances pass through tariffs on the basis of what they get from ESCOM, is an important part of the conversation about energy and water security. Of course, we're here to talk about energy, but water security is equally an important issue. And we're cognizant of the reality that in the South African context, local government has a constitutional responsibility to ensure distribution of electricity, therefore plays a pivotal role in the energy transition and energy security conversations. But then I digress. Let me get back to my. Please receive my warm greetings to this year's Enlit Africa Conference, which is a platform to exchange new ideas and form business relationships that fuel opportunity and innovation. As we gather to address the pressing energy challenges and associated value chains of our time, we stand at the crossroads of opportunities and innovation. Since the advent of the democratic government, local government has been positioned to play a crucial catalytic role in providing, amongst others, equitable access to basic services such as water and electricity supply, waste management, public transportation, and emergency services. Excuse me. However, in the recent years, the government capacity to deliver these fundamental public services has been relatively compromised by factors such as global warming, which engenders the emission of greenhouse gases that leads to higher temperatures. The consequences of climate change have been devastating, especially in coastal areas where rising sea levels and disruptions in the ecosystems have cumulatively posed significant risks to agriculture, water resources, biodiversity, infrastructure, lives, and livelihoods. As such, addressing global warming requires concerted efforts from social partners to reduce emissions, gradually work towards transitions to renewable energy sources, and implement sustainable practices. Excuse me. The sixth administration has been steadfast in the implementation and adapting renewable energy sources and developing adaptive strategies to mitigate the adverse effects on communities and economies. Ladies and gentlemen, in November 2021, at COP26, governments of South Africa and France, Germany, the UK, and the US, together with the European Union, formed the Just Energy Transition Partnership to support South Africa's accelerated and inclusive transition towards a net zero and climate resilient economy. This in line with the highest ambitions of the nationally determined contributions. In response to these global commitments, South Africa has since launched the Just Transition Framework and the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan, in which the province of Mpumalanga has been identified as a priority province. This work is supported by other national and provincial frameworks, such as the Provincial Climate Change Response Strategies, the Just Transition Phase 1 Plan, the Mpumalanga Green Economy Development Plan, and the National Framework for Local Economic Development and Municipal Strategies. As you are aware, Mpumalanga is home to 11 coal-fired power stations and several coal mines. The province accounts for a considerable share of both South Africa's emissions from coal value chains and economic dependency on coal and mining sectors. Energy transition, or rather energy generation and energy industries, together accounts for more than 50% of South Africa's greenhouse gas emissions and 85% of the volume of coal used in the local market. Hence, the necessity to reduce the climate change vulnerabilities and transition risks. Mpumalanga was identified as a pilot site due to reliance on coal, and other provinces are expected to follow. As we have observed in this province, municipalities play a crucial role in facilitating a just energy transition, ensuring that the shift to sustainable energy sources is equitable and inclusive. Their responsibilities include policy implementation, community participation, economic support, infrastructure development, stakeholder and partnership management, plus public education. Ladies and gentlemen, municipalities have a responsibility to adopt and implement policies that promote renewable energy adoption, energy efficiency, the phasing out of fossil fuels, and driving change at the grassroots level through integrated energy resource plans. Admittedly, as the Department of Cooperative Government, we have identified a number of areas in which we have to work with municipalities. Firstly, it's with regards to demand management, and this means the implementation of demand-side management interventions which have the potential to yield substantial savings by reducing energy demand and energy losses, followed by, secondly, alternative energy generation, implying evaluating feasible options and developing renewable energy projects that will provide additional capacity to municipal networks, and last but not least, infrastructure projects by collaborating with municipalities to develop and roll out projects that will address electricity infrastructure backlogs, maintenance backlogs, and skills shortages. Excuse me. Other potential interventions being considered, and some at the implementation stages, are the following. With regards to energy generation and the energy mix, municipal-owned generation with an appropriate mix of dispatchable energy, that is gas, solar PV, and battery storage, and non-dispatchable, for example, solar PV. Generation will provide municipalities and by extension the country with adequate generation capacity. Enabling policies with regards to, amongst others, embedded generation policies must be in place to inform future decisions regarding energy supply and demand for municipalities. However, hurdles such as funding constraints and legal prescripts still require attention. With regards to electricity tariffs, municipalities need to view embedded generators and distributed small-scale generating entities as potential partners and develop appropriate free feed-in tariffs to buy excess power that they generate. Cost of supply studies across all municipalities are necessary to determine the actual cost of supplying electricity, considering current scenarios such as diminishing paying customer bases, multiple embedded generators, illegal connections, and high instances of theft and vandalism. Implementing cost-reflective tariffs is crucial for the financial sustainability of our municipalities. And then, with regards to wheeling frameworks, developing appropriate wheeling frameworks to unlock more energy sources in the country. With multiple independent power producers, projects at various stages of development, a wheeling framework would fast-track the development of such generation projects and ensure more electricity can be wheeled to different parts of the country depending on demand. Further considerations are with regards to power purchase agreements with competitive tariffs that must be considered to ensure the long-term sustainability of our municipalities. And then there's the issue of indigent management, illegal connections, integrity of billing data, smart meter rollout, and the protection of infrastructure, which are all crucial for providing sustainable energy services. But then there are a number of risks and opportunities that we have identified. With regards to opportunities, the following should be exploited to improve service delivery and financial sustainability of our municipalities, while fully acknowledging the risks in this area. The first relates to own generation. Municipal rooftops and small-scale battery energy storage systems can improve the reliability of supply for municipal consumption and reduce energy costs. With regards to self-generation, this including microgrids and buying electricity from IPPs can realize lower tariffs and improve the security of electricity supply. And with regards to battery energy storage systems, these systems can reduce potential demand changes or other charges by providing stored energy during peak periods. And then, as I said, there are risks that have been identified. Risks with regards to, amongst other, small-scale embedded generators and wheeling-related risks. The last area that I wanted to talk to relates to partnerships. We have identified the need to develop appropriate partnerships to enable the implementation of the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan. In this regard, we have partnered with, amongst others, the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, in coordination with the province of Mpumalanga and the South African Local Government Association. Partnered with the National Business Initiatives, and have also secured funding agreements between the European Commission and the Republic. And we've also partnered with the DBSA, focusing on the JET IP project preparation facility and support for COCTA. In essence, ladies and gentlemen, public education plays a critical role in raising awareness about the benefits of renewable energy and energy conservation. Empowering residents to participate in and support the transition is central to municipalities. As I conclude, the JET IP holds immense potential to enhance service delivery and financial stability in municipalities. Key to its success are improved governance, accountability, and thorough monitoring and evaluation. These elements will ensure successful implementation and long-term sustainability for benefiting municipalities. I'm confident that with the support of key stakeholders and donors, local governments can achieve a just energy transition that meets environmental goals while also promoting social equity and economic resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Let's give the Deputy Minister another round of applause. We have come to the end of our plenary session, and I would like to invite you to move on to the Explore floor, where 17 projects are going to be launched from across the continent, from presenting project pitches from generation, alternative fuels, waste, water management, and key infrastructure. All of those projects are seeking funding to get their projects to completion between $1 million to $300 million. You can find information about the project on the app as the booklet for the program has been uploaded. It also has the program and the ticket size, allowing you to attend the relevant sessions. The project pitches will take place during the networking breaks and lunch on the hub, so grab a quick coffee and something to eat and rush on to attend that. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed the discussions. Have a wonderful day further.